Hey everyone, my name is Evan. This is my project titled Lessons from Anthony Bourdain for Adventure Therapy. For context, I hadn't really consumed much of Anthony Bourdain's content. I knew about him, was familiar with parts of his story, but didn't really engage with any of his media. So I decided to watch some episodes of Parts Unknown. And walking into it, I had a feeling it was a travel show, but now that I've seen more of it, I understand that it's bigger than that. It incorporates concepts and conversations around food, culture, and nature, anthropology, and even history. And so we're going to go into a little deep dive on what I learned and how maybe we can apply it to our understanding of adventure therapy and wilderness and outdoors. So here are the episodes that I watched in order. So go ahead and take a quick look at that. I also watched Roadrunner, which was a documentary on Anthony Bourdain. So we'll get into that a little bit too. But these were the episodes that I watched. And here's a clip to start. So the context for this clip, this is from the Scotland episode.
Heading north out of Glasgow,
it is
Scotland
I
quickly
think a good
becomes
encapsulation of what you can kind
something
of
else.
expect from the show.
A savagely beautiful, harsh, but absolutely mesmerizing landscape that seems to have changed not at all for thousands, even millions of years. And across Loch Marie, inaccessible only by boat, one of the great isolated estates, Letteryu. It's the favorite retreat of my friend, Adrian Gill. More widely known as A.A. Gill, he's the much-feared and widely followed restaurant critic for the London Sunday Times. A regular columnist for a spectrum of magazines, author, traveler, and one of the finest essayists of our time. Heading north out of Glasgow, Scotland quickly becomes something else. A savagely Letteryu, as it stands today, was built as a shooting lodge. Deer stalking like they do here is something from another era. But it persists in places like this, which both protect and cull deer populations. If you are, like us, of course, two murderous aristocrats looking to put some venison on the table, you need help. Professional help. And estates like Letteryu come with a stalker. Stephen Miller has been working here for 8 seasons now, both protecting the animals who live on it and helping people like us in the arduous and delicate task of sneaking up on them. We would, as gentlemen of leisure, require a cook. And Adrian has recommended the supremely well-suited Fiona Cullinane, who excels at this kind of Scottish traditional game cookery. Letteryu, as it stands today.
So what Anthony Bourdain wanted to do with this show, and all of his work in particular, was to create conversation. That's kind of the overarching thread through everything that he has created. It's just interesting to note that throughout, obviously, many people know Anthony Bourdain committed suicide. There were a lot of questions around it. It happened very suddenly. And I remember at the time, a lot of people wondering, how could someone who has seen so much of the world and done so much commit suicide? And I think that the answer to that is a lot more complex. But I did note throughout, he kind of did have a reluctance towards therapy. And even when he would engage in it, it was on camera. And so, it's just something to kind of consider through this too. He actually kind of hated the outdoors, and all the times that he would hike, be outside for an extended period of time, he would express his kind of disdain for it. But he would also note how, he was engaging parts of his body that he hadn't really engaged, and it gave him opportunities to contemplate things and it was, he's struggled with addiction. Famously, he was addicted to heroin, and managed to kick it cold turkey. Um, his friends and relatives, loved ones, say that addiction kind of carried into other domains of his life instead, and he would often struggle with connection. Um, he really valued his artistry. He approached everything that he did with a sense of openness, and ultimately, he was a storyteller. So, as I watched this, I came up with a couple themes that I noted and wanted to kind of dig into a little more. So, first of these was connection to others. So, throughout all of these episodes and throughout all of these experiences, um, there were a lot of episodes that centered around his connections with people and some of his relationships. Eric Ripert was one of the people that he would see very often. He considered a close friend. And a lot of the themes around it kind of centered around how gatherings happen. So food is really one of those vehicles that people would gather, people would collect, and he would, he traveled to Borneo to attend a harvest festival that a small community holds annually. This is how people gathered. Music, culture, food, like all of these things, and serve as the vehicles for connection. He noted a few times in Thailand and other places, rural family happiness, this idea of rural family happiness, a simpler life. Everybody has a job. Everyone's connected to the land, ultimately. And that was the next connection that I had made, the connection to the land. Throughout, there was note of the brutality of the land, particularly for people living in Antarctica, a community of about 1,000 people, scientists, blue collar workers, all running the same operation to conduct research. There was the brutality of living connected to that land and trying to survive on it. Scotland, as we saw, that entire warehouse basically of antlers. There's a later scene where he has to hunt. He hunts a deer and kills it, and they gut it right there in the field. And it's a brutal but honest look at how different cultures around the world connect to the land. Many cultures lived and died by the harvest, as he said. Menus changing with the seasons, and food kind of being meals developed by farmers and not by chefs. This was all by the people and for the people. And like I said, in Scotland, he ended up, by the end of it, after he kills the deer, the ritual is to spread the blood on your face for your first kill. So he kind of described it as tired, happy, covered in blood, dragging his knuckles like one of the first people in the land. And I think that was really kind of important to get insight into how connection to the land happens around the world. On the flip side of that, there was a lot around destruction of the earth, climate change. That's what they were doing in Antarctica, was studying climate change, deforestation, all around the world, and the impacts of colonialization are all very obvious and very prevalent in any of the places that he visited. Again, impacts of colonization, right? It's not just, we have a blending of food and blending of culture. There's also destruction of culture and kind of withering of rituals and traditions. Representations of Africa was one of those things that was noted as very, very real and very positive in relation to how Africa has been portrayed in the past in other travel shows or things of that nature. Very often noted in Tanzania, the Masai people. They're a nomadic people. They are tied to the land. The colonization in Tanzania has removed a lot of access, a lot of their access to the land. And so there's this balance between preserving nature and the rights of the indigenous people, the Masai people. Very often, it was noted that the forest is fuel and food for others. And again, across the board, kind of noted that everybody is crushed under the same terrible wheel of colonization and capitalism, which kind of leads to poverty and affluence is one of the other themes that I noticed. Access to the outdoors, it's a privilege, as we've kind of seen in a lot of our readings. In our part of the world, it's a privilege to be able to have that, and for others, it is daily life. It is how they center their lives. The impacts of tourism too. Madagascar was one of those places that there's debate over how much do we open up to tourists, because that will affect how it will bring jobs. Same in Ethiopia too. It'll bring jobs. It'll create jobs, but there's a cost to that too. And throughout, Bourdain was aware of his privilege. I really enjoyed the times where he was on a train, because that was kind of the most obvious. He would always insist on first class in the train, and it was important to kind of see that disparity. De-romanticizing food, ultimately, I think was one of the, if not the biggest thing, making it real, showing how food is essential to people and the preparation and the whole process. I mean, a lot of animals died in this show, and we get our food in a particular way over here, usually, right? We don't always hunt for our food. We experience that very differently. There's not a lot of rituals around that. The way, it's seeing him take ownership of that whole process, and make that something important, for him to, if he's going to eat this animal, he's going to be involved with the process of it and killing it, owning that whole process. I feel like that was something that I saw repeatedly throughout. So what I think we can kind of take from his lessons overall is this idea of connecting to humanity within us and without us. So in the internal understanding of how we connect to ourselves, how we connect to the land, and how we connect to others in that context. And meals, food, preparation of food are really one of those big, glaringly obvious opportunities for community building and for community connection. I think about how we don't always engage in the entire process for that. We snap our fingers and food arrives. And I think that we can understand, if we can understand our role in the process of making and creating food and connecting with others, then we can make that more meaningful. And I think that that's one of the things that we should focus on for any kind of wilderness therapy or any kind of outdoor therapy. Are meals an afterthought? How important is it that the meal preparation, is incorporated into how we bond, how we connect to each other, how we understand each other? Because this is how it works in nearly every other part of the world. And it seems to me that this is an exceedingly human characteristic of how we engage with the land, how we engage with each other. it's through food. It's through preparation of food. And ultimately, that's kind of my closing thought. With when we look at outdoor therapy, wilderness therapy, adventure therapy, like how can we make food more of a central component? How can we find value in connecting with each other through food and the preparation of food? So ultimately, that was my takeaway. I really enjoyed learning about Anthony Bourdain and his impact and how his show shattered a lot of preconceptions about the world. And I'm going to continue watching more after this. So I'm going to leave you with one final thought from Anthony Bourdain.
Even if you've been traveling nearly nonstop for 15 years like me, there are places that snap you out of your comfortable worldview, take your assumptions and your prejudices, and turn them upside down. They lead you to believe that maybe there is hope in the world. Even if you've been traveling nearly nonstop for